I'm here with Prince Harry. Prince Harry. Harry.
I actually said you can call me whatever you want.
Okay.
The decision has been a surprise.
Meghan Markle believed the palace doors had finally opened for her, but one royal historian claims the invitation concealed a far colder reality. Behind the smiles, formal greetings, and carefully staged appearances, an ancient tradition was already deciding whether she would ever truly belong. To the outside world, Meghan's arrival looked like a royal transformation. She had married Prince Harry, received a title, and stepped into ceremonies watched by millions. Her presence seemed to represent change. She was confident, modern, and able to reach an audience the monarchy had struggled to understand. But inside the palace, marriage was only the beginning. A title could establish her position. It could not guarantee trust. According to the royal historian, the monarchy had always separated public welcome from private acceptance. After years spent examining household customs, confidential correspondence, old family arrangements, and traditions rarely discussed beyond palace walls, the historian found repeated signs of an unofficial trial imposed on those who married into the family. Nobody announced it. There was no written rule Meghan could study and no formal warning she could challenge. The test operated quietly. It appeared in seating plans, altered invitations, private dinners, access to heirlooms, and conversations that ended when certain people entered the room. Every detail seemed minor. Together, they formed an invisible judgment. At first, Meghan reportedly believed the restrictions were temporary. Royal life was complicated. Security was strict. Protocol took time to understand. She assumed that patience, hard work, and successful public appearances would gradually open the remaining doors. Harry believed the same. He saw Meghan as intelligent, charismatic, and perfectly suited to help the monarchy face a changing world. He believed their marriage could force the institution to become more open, more responsive, and less trapped by customs that no longer made sense. Yet that confidence alarmed senior courtiers. They did not see a reassuring plan for modernization. They saw a couple who might challenge the slow obedience traditionally expected from every newcomer. Harry's determination to protect Meghan made officials wonder whether she would ever submit to the palace's pace. Then came the first disturbing clue. Meghan appeared at grand ceremonies, greeted crowds, and carried out duties before enormous audiences. But smaller moments remained closed. Private family meetings, intimate gatherings, certain rooms, and meaningful traditions passed without her. No confrontation declared that she had been rejected. Nothing so obvious was ever said. The message came through what was withheld. And slowly, Meghan began to sense the contradiction. She was royal enough to perform for the world, yet not trusted enough to enter the deepest circle behind the performance. The historian was left with one chilling question. Was Meghan being prepared for royal life? Or was the palace waiting to see whether she would fail? To understand why those early exclusions mattered, the historian had to trace the hidden system back through generations, and what emerged was a pattern the palace had protected for more than a century. Long before Meghan arrived, other women had entered the monarchy, believing marriage had secured their future. Yet behind palace walls, each faced a silent trial designed to measure obedience, patience, loyalty, and restraint. The historian claims Meghan's test began before she even understood the rules. Within the monarchy, marriage created legal membership. But it did not guarantee emotional acceptance or institutional trust. This difference mattered most for women entering from outside royal or aristocratic circles. They could receive titles, attend ceremonies, and represent the crown, yet still remain under quiet observation. The family welcomed them publicly, while the institution judged them privately. The expectation was rarely explained. A newcomer was supposed to watch before speaking, learn without demanding answers, and accept customs even when those customs felt unfair, outdated, or deeply personal. Questions were permitted, but only at the right moment, in the right room, and with the right tone. Challenging tradition too openly could be treated as a challenge to the crown itself. The historian found that earlier royal wives were trusted slowly. Private responsibilities, family confidences, and access to sensitive matters came only after they had demonstrated discretion. Their loyalty was measured not through grand gestures, but through restraint. Silence became discipline. A delayed reaction became maturity. Personal sacrifice became proof that the institution came first, but the test was designed to remain invisible. A newcomer might receive incomplete instructions, enter a gathering without knowing its hidden rules, or be expected to understand why one seat, one invitation, or one conversation carried enormous meaning. A mistake could then be remembered as evidence of character rather than evidence that nobody had properly guided her. For Meghan, this system collided with everything that had shaped her before royal life. Her background rewarded clear communication, independence, advocacy, and the ability to define her own public identity. Asking questions meant being prepared. Taking initiative meant being useful. Inside the palace, those same qualities could look like impatience. Harry tried to guide her, but he had never entered the monarchy from the outside. He knew the family, yet he did not fully understand how it examined newcomers. He reportedly reassured Meghan that certain barriers would disappear after the wedding. Courtiers believed the wedding was when the examination truly began. Concern grew when Meghan sought faster progress on projects, clearer explanations, and greater control over her role. She saw energy and preparation. Officials saw resistance to hierarchy. That left her trapped. If she stayed silent, she risked appearing weak. If she spoke, she risked being accused of rejecting royal discipline. The historian's evidence suggested the true test was never simply whether Meghan could perform her duties. It was whether she would allow the palace to decide how slowly she earned acceptance. But the trial became far more personal when Meghan encountered a series of private signals, small decisions that seemed harmless individually, yet together suggested the palace had already begun withholding something far more meaningful than approval. The rejection was never spoken aloud. It appeared in missing invitations, altered seating plans, locked display cases, and family gatherings Meghan learned about only afterward. According to the historian, these were not random oversights. They were the palace's oldest language, and every absence carried a warning. Inside the monarchy, acceptance was rarely declared. It was granted through access, an invitation to a private residence, a seat at an intimate dinner, entry into a family tradition, or permission to wear a meaningful piece of jewelry could say more than any public speech. These gestures marked the difference between performing royal duty and being trusted as part of the dynasty. Public ceremonies were work. They came with schedules, expectations, and carefully managed appearances. Private gatherings were different. They represented closeness, confidence, and recognition away from official staff and public pressure. Meghan reportedly began noticing that the warmth surrounding major appearances did not always follow her into smaller family spaces. A changed seat could be explained as protocol. A different procession order could be dismissed as rank. A residence decision might be presented as practical. Yet within palace culture, each choice carried another meaning. Position revealed confidence. Access revealed trust. Exclusion revealed doubt. For Meghan, the contradiction became harder to ignore. She was expected to represent the monarchy before the world, yet she was not always fully informed about decisions shaping her image, responsibilities, or future. She carried the pressure of royal visibility without receiving all the protections reserved for those already inside. Certain objects made the divide even clearer. A personal note, a household privilege, an inherited jewel, or a private invitation could signal that a newcomer had crossed an invisible line, from guest to family, from public figure to trusted royal. After the wedding, Meghan may have expected those signals to arrive. Harry held a senior role, and their marriage had attracted worldwide attention. But palace officials reportedly resisted moving quickly. Popularity, they believed, was not seniority. Visibility was not loyalty. Trust had to be earned at the institution's pace. Harry became increasingly disturbed by the difference. He questioned why Meghan was expected to carry enormous royal pressure while remaining outside the circle that offered emotional protection and private support. A disagreement followed, and his demands for clarity only increased suspicion. Within the palace, symbolic decisions were meant to be accepted, not challenged. Then the historian uncovered something more serious: a private tradition performed after a royal marriage, one that determined whether a newcomer would be welcomed into the monarchy's inner historical story. Meghan had not simply been asked to wait. According to the historian, she was never formally included. And when the historian finally named that tradition, the meaning of Meghan's exclusion changed completely, because this was not merely about etiquette, but about whether the palace intended to preserve her place in royal history at all. The tradition was private, symbolic, and almost unknown outside royal circles. After marrying into the family, a new royal spouse was quietly invited to contribute to the dynasty's sealed household archive. Meghan, the historian claims, was never given that invitation, and the omission carried a devastating meaning. According to the historian, this archive was far more than a collection of official documents. It held the private memory of the monarchy, the emotions, reflections, and personal objects that public records could never fully capture. A newly accepted spouse might be asked to provide a handwritten account of entering royal life, a private photograph, a meaningful possession, or a sealed letter intended for future generations. Nothing was published, nothing was displayed for applause. The contribution remained protected, hidden among the intimate records of those who had helped shape the family from within. But participation was not automatic. Marriage opened the legal door, yet the invitation to contribute reportedly came only after senior royals believed a newcomer had demonstrated lasting loyalty, restraint, and respect for the institution's secrets. It was a quiet mark of confidence. To be included meant the palace believed your place would endure. To be excluded meant something else. Meghan allegedly learned about the custom indirectly, through references to contributions left by women who had entered the family before her. That discovery carried a painful message. Others had been permitted to record their arrival in their own words, while Meghan's place inside the family archive remained empty. She was left to question why. Was the invitation delayed by administration? Was she still being tested? Or had senior figures already decided that her role was temporary? The historian's conclusion was stunning. Meghan had not simply missed a private ceremony. She had been denied the opportunity to place her own voice inside the monarchy's protected historical memory. Publicly, she had been celebrated as a new royal. Privately, the ritual marking true acceptance had been withheld. Palace officials reportedly had their reasons. Tensions between the Sussex household and senior courtiers were rising, and some feared that deeply private material might one day leave royal control. Yet their caution created a destructive contradiction. The more they questioned Meghan's discretion, the more isolated she felt. And the more isolated she became, the more determined she was to ensure that others could not define her experience for her. Harry reportedly reacted with fury. To him, the omission suggested Meghan had never been treated as permanent, no matter how warmly the monarchy spoke in public. He did not see it merely as a judgment of her behavior. He saw it as a rejection of their marriage. Perhaps officials intended only to delay the invitation until Meghan had proven herself over several years. But to Meghan, the delay carried a harsher meaning. No amount of duty, sacrifice, or public success would ever be enough. And once she understood that her voice might never be preserved inside the palace, The historian claims she began thinking about how to preserve it herself. That realization transformed a hidden palace slight into something far more dangerous, because Meghan no longer saw silence as patience. She began to see it as surrendering her story to people who had already decided how history would remember her. For Meghan, the missing invitation became proof that the palace expected her to serve without belonging. For Harry, it reopened every fear he carried about royal control, emotional isolation, and the fate of women who entered the monarchy. Their private frustration was about to become open resistance. Meghan had changed almost everything. She had left her country, stepped away from her career, reshaped her public identity, and entered a daily life ruled by tradition. Yet after all that sacrifice, she still seemed to remain outside the family's most meaningful circle. The archive invitation became more than one withheld ritual. It came to represent every unanswered message, every vague explanation, and every decision made about her without her involvement. In private, Meghan allegedly asked Harry the question neither of them could ignore: had the family ever truly intended to accept her, or had her role always been limited to appearances, ceremony, and controlled symbolism? For Harry, the question struck a much deeper wound. He had long feared that the institution placed survival, reputation, and public order above personal pain. The archive exclusion may have reminded him of Princess Diana, whose private suffering was often buried beneath the official royal story. He could not allow Meghan to become another woman, remembered only through a version approved by the palace. That fear hardened into determination. Harry reportedly confronted senior officials and demanded to know when Meghan would finally be recognized through the tradition. The reply offered no clear date. Trust, he was told, required time. Stability, discretion, proof that private royal life would remain private. To Harry, it sounded like a moving target. The palace could delay acceptance for years without ever openly admitting rejection. Worse, officials allegedly argued that his anger proved why caution was necessary. His demands made them more suspicious. Their suspicion made him more furious. Neither side could escape the cycle. Meghan now faced an impossible choice. She could remain within the system and hope patience would eventually earn her a place. Or she could refuse to surrender herself to an institution she believed would never grant her full agency. It was then, the historian suggests, that Meghan began preserving her own record, not necessarily for immediate release, but as protection. Private journals, personal correspondence, and conversations with trusted friends became an alternative archive, one held beyond the crown's reach. That possibility alarmed palace insiders. The quiet test meant to measure Meghan's loyalty now threatened to produce a competing historical account. The conflict was no longer about whether she could adapt to royal life. It had become a battle over ownership. Who would define what happened behind palace doors? And in the middle of that struggle, Harry reportedly made Meghan a private promise. Her story would not disappear simply because the palace had refused to preserve it. But once the Sussexes began protecting their own version of events, the palace's caution hardened into fear, and a hidden struggle over memory, loyalty, and public truth began shaping every decision that followed. The monarchy had survived scandal by controlling timing, language, and access. Meghan and Harry threatened that system not through titles or ceremony, but by keeping their own account. The historian claims the palace soon realized it was no longer managing a difficult transition, it was losing control of the narrative. Royal power had always depended on more than crowns and tradition. It depended on memory. Private archives, official biographies, selected photographs, and carefully measured statements helped turn confusion into order. Events could be delayed, softened, or framed until one stable version remained, the version history was expected to accept. Meghan and Harry increasingly rejected that method. They believed personal experience should not be filtered until every uncomfortable detail disappeared. To them, silence did not always protect dignity. Sometimes, It protected those with the greatest authority. The palace now faced a troubling possibility. By denying Meghan a place within its protected archive, it may have pushed her to create an independent one, filled with emotions, private conversations, unanswered questions, and accusations the institution could neither edit nor contain. Senior courtiers reportedly became more guarded. Conversations grew shorter. Sensitive information passed through fewer hands. Decisions involving the Sussex household were controlled more tightly, as though every sentence might one day become evidence. But those restrictions only deepened Meghan's suspicion. She began to feel that the palace was not simply protecting secrets. It might also be preparing a version of future conflict in which she would carry the blame. Harry's resentment intensified. He saw institutional surveillance, selective leaks, and unnamed sources shaping public opinion, while he and Meghan were expected to remain silent. Officials believed they were defending the crown. Harry believed they were defending themselves at his wife's expense. Beneath the tension sat another struggle: rivalry between royal households. Each watched popularity, funding, press attention, and proximity to the future king. Meghan's global visibility disturbed that balance. She could command enormous interest without relying entirely on palace tradition. That made her valuable and dangerous. She could help modernize the monarchy's image, yet her independence threatened a hierarchy built on assigned roles and controlled attention. The historian identifies the archive rejection as the moment the palace chose containment over integration. Instead of bringing Meghan into the institution's private memory, it kept her at a distance. The irony was devastating. The palace feared she might one day tell her own story, but its refusal to include her may have made that outcome inevitable. Their eventual decision to step back was therefore not a sudden rebellion. It was the final stage of a longer conflict over belonging, voice, and the right to define history. Even after their departure, the divide remained. The palace held the official archive. Meghan and Harry held the emotional record. Leaving royal duty changed the battlefield, but it did not end the struggle, because outside the palace, Meghan finally gained the freedom to speak, while the monarchy faced the terrifying possibility that its silence could no longer control what the world believed. Freedom gave Meghan a voice, but it also deepened the wound. Every interview, statement, and public revelation carried the shadow of the tradition that had excluded her. The palace remained silent, yet that silence now sounded less like dignity and more like an unfinished accusation. Outside royal duty, Meghan could finally describe emotions the palace had never publicly acknowledged. She could speak about isolation, confusion, and the cost of entering an institution where every personal struggle was weighed against reputation. For supporters, this was a woman reclaiming the story that had been controlled around her. For critics, it was proof that she had exposed private matters she was once expected to protect. That division went directly to the heart of the archive tradition. Acceptance had depended on trust that private royal life would remain sealed. Every time Meghan spoke, palace insiders could argue that their caution had been justified. Yet if she had stayed silent, the official version of events would have remained unchallenged. It was an impossible trap. The palace refused to address the tradition directly. That silence protected the monarchy from confirming the historian's claim, but it also allowed suspicion to grow. Had Meghan truly been rejected? Or had she simply left before completing a long period of observation and trust? Without an explanation, both interpretations became more powerful. Harry became increasingly direct about what he saw as institutional failure. In his view, secrecy had stopped being a shield for dignity and had become a method of avoiding responsibility. He believed the palace could preserve its image while individuals carried the emotional cost. Meghan understood the danger of speaking, but she also understood the danger of saying nothing. Silence could be used to erase her pain. speech could be used to disqualify her from the acceptance she had once wanted. The historian argues that the tradition belonged to another era, when royal spouses had few independent platforms and almost no power to challenge the family's version of events. Meghan changed that equation. Her global reach meant exclusion no longer guaranteed obedience or silence. That may be why the palace came to regret withholding the invitation. Not because the ritual itself mattered to the public, but because inclusion might have created loyalty, reassurance, and a sense that Meghan's voice had a protected place within the family. Instead, she was left with a deeper question. Did the palace reject her because she failed its test? Or was the test designed so she could never truly pass? Harry paid the price as well. He remained divided between inherited identity and chosen family, unable to move toward one without seeming to betray the other. And that is where the historian's revelation becomes larger than one marriage. Because the real scandal may not be that Meghan was excluded, but that the palace still relies on traditions capable of turning private uncertainty into permanent public rupture. The palace tradition was created to protect continuity, loyalty, and secrecy. Yet in Meghan's case, it may have produced the opposite: resentment, division, and a competing royal history beyond the crown's control. Now the monarchy faces a choice it has avoided for generations: change the rules or repeat the damage. The sealed archive had once seemed like a small private custom, but the historian argues that it represented something much larger: the monarchy's struggle to protect ancient hierarchy while facing modern demands for openness, fairness, and personal dignity. Royal customs often survive because few people know they exist. Hidden from public scrutiny, they are protected by silence and by the belief that every newcomer will eventually accept them. But Meghan's experience exposed the emotional cost of that system. She was expected to prove loyalty without being clearly told what loyalty required. She was asked to wait without knowing whether acceptance would ever come. That silence meant something different to everyone involved. For the palace, delay may have represented caution. For Meghan, it felt like judgment. For Harry, it looked like the repetition of institutional failures he believed had already caused deep personal damage. Perhaps one invitation could have changed everything. A request for Meghan to contribute her own words to the family archive might have assured her that her place was real, her sacrifices were recognized, and her voice would survive inside the institution. In a family where emotions were rarely expressed directly, such a gesture could carry enormous power. Instead, the empty space remained. Future royal spouses may not accept the same conditions. They may refuse years of silent testing, private exclusion, and the belief that emotional sacrifice proves devotion. That leaves the monarchy with a generational dilemma: preserve traditions built around secrecy, or risk greater openness so newcomers do not feel controlled, temporary, and disposable. Somewhere within the imagined sealed archive is the missing contribution Meghan never made: her own account of entering royal life. Yet outside those walls, the record has become enormous. Interviews, statements, documentaries, memoirs, and worldwide arguments now preserve the story the palace never invited her to tell privately. That is the final irony. By refusing to protect Meghan's voice inside the monarchy, the institution may have ensured that she would tell her story publicly on a scale it could never control. Her rejection was not one dramatic command or public humiliation. It was a quiet decision whose meaning grew with every unanswered question. Harry and Meghan now build a legacy beyond royal approval, while the palace remains surrounded by history but unable to decide how this chapter will be remembered. Was the tradition a reasonable test of loyalty, or proof that Meghan had always been destined to remain an outsider? Because behind every royal portrait lies another version of history, and in the silence between Meghan Markle and the palace, that hidden version may be the one the monarchy fears most.